and we only have an hour. So we are going to solve this problem in this hour, and we have a great panel with us today to help us do that. To my immediate left is Carol Quinlan, who is the president of Davidson College, and to her left is Eduardo Padron, who's the president of Miami-Dade College in Florida. And then my far right is Governor Mitch Daniels, president of Purdue University, and Steve Knapp, president of the George Washington University. And to my immediate right, a man who's been in the news a little bit lately, is Ted Mitchell, as an undersecretary at the U.S. Department of Education. What's interesting about this topic is that I've been covering higher education for almost 20 years, and I've never seen, I don't think, this much interest in the subject as I have in just particularly last couple of months. And in fact, if there's one illustration of that, I have a stack of books on my desk back in Washington, new books that have been released on higher education just since the beginning of March, right? Including by well-known journalists, Frank Bruni at the New York Times and Fareed Zakaria, who just wrote a book on liberal education that came out just actually a couple of weeks ago. And as I was preparing for this panel, I was looking through those books and recent coverage on higher ed, and I realized that one of the problems is we can't really coalesce around what is the problem we're trying to solve, right? So we claim we have all these problems in higher ed, and we can't seem to agree on what the problem is, if there is one problem. And it's a complex enterprise, obviously, so there are multiple problems. But I just want to hear from each of the panelists, because you have Frank Bruni, who's talking about the importance of a college education in a fast-moving economy. You have access to selective colleges for low-income students, which is a common theme in the New York Times these days. Kevin Carey's new book is talking a lot about technology and the role of technology in higher ed. So if each of you could talk a little bit about, in your opinion, what's the one problem we need to solve in higher education in the coming decade? And then the flip of that, what are we doing right? What's the one problem we shouldn't try to solve for in the coming decade? And I'll start way on my left here with President Padron of Miami-Dade.
Well, I feel that the main problem, if I could define it in one sentence, is that our industry is still struggling to come into the 21st century innovation economy. We still have the best higher education system in the world, the best colleges and universities. I feel that everyone around the world wants to come here to get their degrees, and we should celebrate that. But what has changed is the world around us. Our economic system, the globalized society has different expectations and different requirements that we're struggling to meet. And I put it very simply. What used to be a privilege or perhaps an option for most Americans as recent as 40, 50 years ago is no longer so. It's an imperative, meaning going to college.
So does that mean access is the issue that we need?
It's not just access, but it's ability to succeed.
Okay.
And many of us have made the transition or are making the transition from what we used to call the right to fail, swim or sink, to one that is the right to succeed, where the responsibility for the success of the student is a shared responsibility of the institution and the student. But the problem is that if you look back 40, 50 years ago, most Americans with little education could go into factories and offices doing repetitive tasks, manual work most of the time, earn a good wage that would allow them to achieve the American dream, be middle class. We know that most of those jobs have disappeared. You no longer have those jobs where people stay for 30 years and retire with a good pension. And the fact of the matter is most Americans change jobs more than 10 times during their productive life. And what I'm trying to say is basically that today, in order for Americans to be able to have any chance to join the middle class and be contributors to the growth of this country, is by getting a college degree, a college credential of some kind. And that is a big challenge. It's not only one of access, but making sure that we support the students to the point where they're able to accomplish those objectives.
I want to go all the way to the opposite end here to President Daniels. What's the one, in your opinion, in this next decade, what's the one problem we should be trying to solve in higher education?
I think probably the validation of a value proposition that is both persuasive and transparent to the student or would-be student. And I think maybe one reason we struggle is, and your question's a good one, but a hard one is we have multiple systems, or we should. And sometimes I think it's too easy to confuse the college systems that we knew, or that the people writing these books are familiar with what is best for everybody. And just look at the spectrum that's sitting right here. You got, I'm sure purposely, several different kinds of universities, and that's an important statement all by itself. You know, thank goodness for what Eduardo and his university are doing, but I hope all the rest of us are doing half as good a job. We serve very different audiences, and we need to. A lot of our systems act as though there were just one system, and therefore just one answer to your question.
And I want to get to that point in a little bit. President Quinlan, what do you think what's the one problem we should be trying to solve in higher ed?
So I think the best way to think about that question is to ask, what's higher education for? And it seems like right now we're renegotiating the social contract between higher ed and the country we serve, and that if we think about what higher ed is for in three categories, where we serve students, we have obligations to our students, and there I would say completion, a job, and debt default is our obligation there, as well as a path to lifelong learning and career satisfaction. We serve the society that supports us in all kinds of ways, and there I would say we in higher ed have to take a greater responsibility for the educational ecosystem, particularly by piloting innovative, replicable, scalable interventions that work, or by redefining access in ways that accommodate the new economy. I think we stand for certain core values that matter in this society, like free inquiry and upward mobility and equal educational opportunity. And that while higher ed may have always stood, sort of served these three constituencies, core values, students, and the society around us, how we do that and what specifically we're being asked to do is really different now. And so to the extent that we're able to take a step back and say, what is higher ed for? We would allow for the differentiation that Mitch Daniels is talking about and actually define not one problem, but the range of ways in which as a sector and with partnerships beyond the sector, we can actually fulfill the function that our country is asking us to fulfill right now.
President Nam.
First, let me say this is a great panel. It's an honor to be on it. I think the problem, the central problem as I perceive it, is a direct result of the central strength of universities as they've traditionally existed. And that is the discipline basis of knowledge and the pursuit of knowledge. That is the focus on academic fields that define departments, that define curricula, and that produce the courses, and in fact, decide on the research directions that scholars will undertake. When I started teaching was at the University of California at Berkeley. We would periodically review curriculum and review requirements that the department was imposing on majors. It never occurred to us to ask students what they wanted to study. It never occurred to us to ask what society was looking for, what employers cared about. What we asked was, what was the body of knowledge we were trying to transmit? What ought students to learn? And that focus on a discipline as a progressive body of building knowledge has been the basis of probably the most powerful instrument in economic development the world has known in many ways. At the first session this morning, our host, Mike Milken, showed a slide indicating that a huge percentage of all the economic growth in the world over the last 2 centuries has been a direct result of research in health and medicine and other fields. And I would say you could go beyond that and talk about other fields that are also influenced by and importantly nurtured by what goes on in universities. What we need to find is a balance between preserving that core disciplinary focus, which I think remains the most powerful instrument for acquiring new knowledge, for building humanities' capacities in multiple directions, while at the same time addressing in a much more market-oriented and I would say customer-oriented way the needs of society, the needs of employers, and the needs of our students. And we have to do that through innovation. We have an I-Corps grant for the National Science Foundation that is based at the George Washington University, but that includes the Virginia Technology, the Virginia Institute of Technology, Virginia Tech, Johns Hopkins University, and the University of Maryland. And the purpose of that is to get scientists to think about how what they're doing in the laboratory can be relevant to the needs of industry. And they're put through a boot camp where they have to find 100 customers themselves that they can talk to about what they might be producing. And to get that mindset reversed, it's not invent it and see if someone will buy it. It's try to understand what people are looking for and see if you can meet those needs. What we need to do is take that same innovative approach and apply it to courses and curricula, at least in some of the fields, professional fields, particularly at master's level education, also all the way, I think, through vocational training, what goes on in community colleges that Eduardo so powerfully exemplifies. We need to do that while at the same time preserving the core disciplines. I don't think we want to lose either one of those. We've seen the latter of those has been at the heart of our institutions. We need to develop the former. That requires a huge cultural change, and that's what we're really focusing on right now as an institution.
Mm-hmm. And Ted.
So I've had a chance to listen to the better answers from my colleagues, and I agree it's a great honor to be a part of this group. So let me agree fundamentally with what my colleagues have said. Let me take it from a slightly different point of view, Jeff. Carol mentioned completion. If I were going to aim at one problem, it would be completion. And let me tell you why. I think there are basically three reasons. So first is that as a society, we've called on education, and now in the last 30, 40 years, Eduardo, higher education, to be an engine of social mobility, to really not just allow but encourage people from wherever they start to go as high as their aspirations, their skill, and their energy will take them. That's a really good thing. And we've made some progress. We've increased dramatically the number of first-generation students in their first college-going generation to go to college. We have increased dramatically the number of Latino students and African-American students who go to college, and increased the number of low-income students who go to college. You know, this year, for the first time, Latino high school graduates are attending college at a rate higher than their Anglo peers. I think that's a remarkable indicator of that progress on access. But on the completion side, and Eduardo, you talked about support. On the completion side, we're not there. We're not living up to our commitment to those students who we have brought into the system. And just making sure that we're filling the holes in that leaky bucket, I think, is important for those students we're bringing into the system. But there's second and third order to it as well. I was at University High School. I played hooky this morning for an hour and a half. Went down to University High School and talked with their senior class about going to college, and talked about their hopes and their fears. And their number one fear was that they weren't going to be able to finish. And how hard to start worrying about whether you're going to finish. And we'll get into some of the reasons behind that. But I think that at the same time, with one voice, we're telling students that college is open and an opportunity. With the facts on the ground, these students are learning through their sisters and brothers and cousins that it's not as easy as it looks. So there's that cultural piece that I worry we're tipping.
Well, and speaking of culture, here we are in Hollywood, and if you look at our television and movies, when they portray colleges and universities, it's the traditional college and university, many of which are on this stage, 18 to 22-year-olds, 4-year institutions, which is really only a Hollywood vision of American higher education, because close to 80% of students go to public universities, close to 50% that go to community colleges. Many students start and don't finish. So we have more people in this country now with some credit and no degree. So how do we shift this national conversation? Because when we talk about college, I think many people in this room, many people in Washington, as you know, and many people in the mainstream media and everywhere else think of traditional colleges and universities and traditional students. But that's not who is mostly in higher ed today, and more important, who's coming.
That's right. So the typical college student is now over 30, has spent some time in the workforce, maybe working currently, and is accumulating higher education in ways that the residential model never imagined. So accumulating credits from multiple institutions, completing credits online, building a portfolio of not just credits, but in some cases competencies. And Eduardo, to your point about not having a business model for the 21st century, the fact that most of our policies and most of our logic model in our head is based on ivy, brick, and grass is a real problem, Jeff.
So Mitch, where are these solutions going to come? You have a unique perspective. You worked in the White House administration in Washington. You were a governor of a state. You're now in higher ed. Are solutions going to come from within government at the federal or state level? Are they going to come from within existing higher education institutions? Are they going to come from the private sector? Is it a combination of all? And if it's a combination of all, how is that ever going to happen?
Well, let's start with the easy one. Not likely to be government.
Okay.
We agree with that.
Yeah.
And that's at the federal, and when we say government, federal and state, do you think? I
Probably.
mean,
Yeah.
traditionally, higher ed has really been a state issue.
I don't want to be
so-
too flip about it, but no, I wouldn't look there
Okay.
for the initiation of ideas that may work. I think it has to be. We hope it'll be a demand pull phenomenon. I do, and I think things you two were just saying point the direction. The more that today and tomorrow's students become focused on their own situation. In other words, what are you going to learn? What are you going to do after high school? And it could be any of a variety of things, and the variety is going to grow. But if we can help young people or not so young people to think just first of all about what they're trying to be or to become, and to look at and to get away from the old stereotypes that many of us struggle to. Even though we know all these data you're talking about, 80% in non-traditional students, that the world is ready to supply these new credentials, these new competencies through these new mechanisms and new technologies, and I hope that young people and those who advise them and reach them will interest huge numbers of them in pursuing these alternative paths, and then it's just on those of us who are associated with more traditional universities to put up or shut down.
So let's talk about these alternative pathways for a minute. We're about to enter into college graduation season when we're going to bestow onto millions of 22-year-olds and more older students a bachelor's degree. Carol, what's the value of the bachelor's degree today? And do we need... one of the things when you go to a lot of conferences today, especially with a lot of non-traditional higher ed players out there, they talk about new credentials, micro-credentials, and so forth. And, when most of the institutions up here provide, associate degrees, bachelor's degrees, and a collection of master's degrees and certificates. But do we need more than just the bachelor's degree to signal to the job market that a student is ready?
But one of the we've talked a little bit about differentiation, and one of the issues with the term bachelor's degree is that nobody actually knows what it means. And the one thing we know is that transcripts and grades are not comparable within an institution, let alone across institutions. So it's frankly a really dumb way to evaluate the credentials and compare them, and there has to be a better way. So what I see coming is a way to give students of all ages and at all stages of their education, the opportunity to construct for themselves how they wish to represent their credentials and accomplishments, and institutions then verify the data, right? So in some sense, we have now institution-specific credentials, which make far less sense than student-specific credentials.
So does that mean the learning could happen at multiple places?
Right.
It doesn't necessarily have to happen within
Absolutely.
the four walls within the 4 years.
Right, and so if you think about that is in a sense what four-year institutions have done already, right? We have internships, we have study abroad, we have community service, we have a whole range of opportunities for students to learn valuable things. And if they could own their self-presentation in a way that employers could evaluate and compare across institutions, and I think technology is our friend there. I really think that we will come up with a better way than a transcript, a better way than an e-portfolio for students to represent what they've done. And that will push institutions towards, one, increasing differentiation so that a student knows what they're getting from each of us, and also multi-institutional learning, which is, I think, the way of the future, even for traditional 18 to 22-year-olds.
Steve, you had a point.
So I'll give a specific example that might be of interest because I think it addresses a number of these issues. So a couple of years ago, although we're a private university, we signed an agreement with the Commonwealth of Virginia that in which our School of Nursing has an arrangement with every community college all up and down the Commonwealth, that students who get an associate's degree and meet certain admissions criteria will be able to complete their bachelor's degree primarily in an online program. And we did this for two reasons. First of all, it enables them to stay in often cases in the rural communities. That helps build a primary care capacity within those rural communities, so they don't have to move to a city. What often happens with nursing students is they then get connected with the hospital, they never go back to the rural communities. It's a hybrid course, meaning it has some face-to-face instruction as a component of it, but by and large it's online. And this is, I think, an interesting case of a private institution partnering with a state institution, with a network of state institutions, make it possible for students to continue to work, to remain in their communities, get the credentials they need, which will in fact be, that is the sort of going credential for a nursing
Steve, I want to
degree.
follow up on something you said earlier about discipline-specific research in particular, because if we think of colleges as teaching and learning institutions as well as research institutions, employers don't necessarily think within disciplines. And in fact, the T-shaped individual, you want depth and breadth, right? So colleges and universities, for the most part, have organized themselves around faculty and what faculty want, and faculty think within discipline. So how do we achieve both the research function of universities as well as this new evolution in terms of what employers want out of today's college graduates, which is a mixture of both practical and hands-on education, as well as classroom learning that though goes across disciplines?
So I think you need some variation of functions within the institution. The kinds of faculty that are traditionally trained in sort of PhD-centered, discipline-specific programs like the ones that many of us went through in traditional universities are not going to be necessarily the best people to send out in the field to do the kinds of entrepreneurial programs that we're talking about, which are often much more practice-focused. But it seems to me you can have a single department that can have a combination of those functions within that department. And I think that model at research universities like ours is going to become increasingly common. Part-time graduate education has existed for decades, so this isn't brand new. What's new is getting faculty to think not only about providing what they do full-time to part-time students, but doing it in a way that meets the needs of the specific communities that they're addressing, whether it's nurses in rural communities or whether it's people working, or it's veterans returning from, it's another huge focus of ours, it's veterans returning with experiences that are not yet credentialed, figuring out ways to credential those, but then also figuring out what they need to make the transition into a teaching career or into a nursing career or into an operations management career. Okay. And we can design programs that do that can be based in traditional departments, but they're not necessarily taught by the same faculty who are doing that laboratory-based research or the PhD instruction.
Ted, you have a quick condition, and I want to get to Eduardo first.
A quick one. So I think that this issue of differentiation is critically important, and I'd add one more, which is content. I think that the building, when you've got young faculty members, you build your course content, you do that, you deliver it, you assess it, you do all of that. And I think that a part of what we're seeing is content being disaggregated from some faculty who would create it. And I think that we've learned from the K-12 environment that there is a kind of liberating part of that for even the teaching faculty at a liberal arts college to be able to coach rather than deliver, and to be able to help students master the competency around managing content, which is very different than just delivering the content and getting it back.
So I want to step back for a moment and talk about higher education as an enterprise for the nation and for the world. We've talked a lot about individuals and a lot about institutions. And Eduardo, recently President Obama proposed free community college. And at the turn of the 20th century, we had this evolution of universal high school. And now, perhaps, given the economy, we need a moment of universal college, and perhaps the 13th and 14th year of high school now is going to be community college. What do you think of that, of the president's proposal?
Well, I'm a firm believer that the president is right. It was about 100 years ago precisely that universal high school became a universal right for most Americans. I think if we understand the economics of the world today, if we understand the dynamics of the American economy and what it takes to maintain a leadership position in the world and to continue to grow and support this economy, I think it's important that we provide an opportunity for all Americans to be able to achieve at least 2 years of college education. Of course, there are many details within that we could explore, but the issue is that I think that a few years from now, when we look back, in fact, we're able to do that, we'll all be celebrating the fact that this country realized that doing that was the best thing that we could ever do for the American economy. No question, and I'm passionate about this, because every indicator that you see in terms of the percentage of jobs that are being created in the American economy today, every study from the Georgetown Workforce Center, tells you the fact that in order for you to be able to achieve the American dream in America today, and more so in the future, require credentials beyond high school.
Right. But yeah,
And the only way that I can think of making sure that happens is by providing that opportunity free to all Americans.
right. But yet we have this growing divide in American higher education, where all the benefits of higher ed, particularly in the last 10, 20 years, have gone to students who have come from the highest income families. In fact, all the growth and most of the growth in bachelor's degrees have come at that level. And if you look ahead of where students are going to come in the future, most of them are going to come from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. And so I actually want to give this question to all the presidents on the panel. How do we solve this issue where most of the benefits of higher education right now are going to students from the highest socioeconomic incomes?
So from so I think there's two approaches to that. One is it's on all of us who are at colleges to get more low-income kids to and through our institutions, right? So I think there's a pretty aggressive national effort to try to do that. And I think most people are on board. And so we have a relationship with the College Advising Corps. We really aggressively recruit kids for whom Davidson would be a good fit from all over the place. And I think most institutions that see themselves as a path to opportunity are trying to do that. But I also think that we're limited, our imaginations are so limited by our institutional borders. Right. So I really think that as my school, we serve 2,000 students. Steph Curry was one of them, but so it's important, but 2,000 students. I think it's on us to figure out how to make education a pathway to upward mobility and opportunity in this country. And so our faculty work to develop curricula that could be disseminated to high schools and serve millions of students.
So it has to be done at scale.
I think I would say our imaginations are very limited if we think in terms of our own institutions and who we directly serve, and that the opportunity that technology and differentiation give us is to reimagine what the role of higher education as a sector is, what our potential partners are, and what kind of cross-sector partnerships are now possible, and really make education the pathway to opportunity that it needs to be in a democratic society. And if you don't think that that's our problem, I view that as my problem.
But Mitch, you're trying to do that. I know Purdue is part of the University Innovation Alliance, part of 11 public universities serving about 400,000 students who are trying to share ideas around this. But the fact of the matter is that for all 11 of those institutions, they're seeing fewer and fewer dollars from the states. In most of the states now, students pay a majority of their education, which is really a big difference between 30 and 40 years ago. Mm-hmm. So how do public institutions in particular, especially large publics like yours that serve enormous amounts of students, how are they going to particularly serve the lowest income students that are knocking on your door now?
I'm not going to presume to prescribe for anybody else. I mean, we're going to try to grow our student body. The tendency had been the other way. Just to go back to something that I think is relevant for a second. So I think we can all agree with Ted that completion is a very good goal to center on. Everybody's rightly fixed on it right now, but you have to have some cautions. It can lead you to bad behavior, like just raise the standards to get in. I can give you, I told people I can give you 100% completion rate. We're letting one kid who had a 2,400, right? And pretty sure he'll finish.
Maybe.
Or you can go the other way and lower standards.
Yeah, that's right. Lower standards.
Well, I was just about to say, and, we see this in high school. You press for higher graduation rates, lower dropout rates, let's say in high school, we got a nice increase, but under the microscope, part of the increase was people sort of waving kids through. So you talk about 2 free years at community college. By the way, I proposed an Indiana plan to do exactly that. It had its own financing mechanism, which the opportunity came and went. But nothing wrong with that as an objective. But let's face it, so much of what we ask community colleges to do is remediation work. It's breach of warranty work because the K-12 system, these kids have a diploma, but if you think college diplomas are of questionable validity, have a look at a lot of high school, what high schools call their diplomas. So, I think we all embrace the idea that we have to go after these students. We have to accept, as Eduardo, I think, said, the responsibility to make their success our own definition of success. We're all working hard to do that, but we shouldn't be under any illusions that.
Steve, any other thoughts on this one issue of the
I
growing
want to
income
pick
divide?
up the general theme that Carol introduced there of collaboration. I would extend that to collaboration across sectors, which I think has been the most sorely lacking reality of.
Meaning
of
sectors
education.
within higher education?
No, I mean
Across.
between pre-K to
Pre-K
12,
all the
12
way
to.
up. So
We talked about
think
this
of it
at
as
lunch.
business, government.
People being prepared for, they're not being prepared for the things that are going to be expected of them, and that happens at multiple levels. So employers aren't getting what they want out of college students. Colleges aren't getting what they want out of high school programs. And in general, there's just a disconnection. One of the ways we're trying to overcome that in the District of Columbia is we're actually sending people out into high schools to help families figure out how to apply for financial aid so they can go to college, not necessarily to go to our institution, wherever they want to go. And also so that we can get students and their families starting to think about college early enough on so they can begin to get the preparation they need. But it's kind of ad hoc at this point. I think if we can make that systematic, I'd love to see the Department of Education, which I know they're striving to do, become the brokers for a kind of conversation about how we could really put these sectors together in a seamless way so we would all understand what was being aimed at and what it was going to take to create those pathways. Whether when students decide where they want to go, they end up going. I always encourage students to consider not just universities like ours, because right now cities are so popular as a destination for college students, but also the extraordinary wealth of liberal arts colleges that we have that are now being, I think, underutilized by our students. But also the whole system of vocational training that has lapsed in our lifetimes. And we talked about at lunch how we might want to see that restored. However we look at this, I think it really requires a systematic thinking through of the connections among all those sectors and what the pathways should be through them. Yep. And then I know that faculty in my institution would be eager to work all up and down that spectrum in order to help students move along that pathway and then to tailor things to their expectations, their aspirations, and give them a way forward throughout the course of their educational careers. I think we can do that through greater collaboration. We need somebody to kind of foster that conversation. I'd love to see the Department of Education.
So do we need, you raise a great point. Do we need more pathways? I mean, when you graduate from high school in this country, you could go and get a job, and not a very good one, with a high school education. You could live in your parents' basement, and most parents don't want that.
Now you can get a not very good one with a college diploma.
Well, okay, you go the military, and that's a declining option for most students. So many students just end up in college as kind of a default because we don't have a lot of other options. I was at a New America event last week in DC where General McChrystal was talking about the idea of national service for everybody, which of course is a potential popular pathway. But do we need more than just, 2-year colleges and 4-year colleges and more, not necessarily not going to college, but does everybody necessarily need to go to college exactly at the age of 18?
I can see, let me just say briefly, lots of ways of doing it. Germany has a whole system that people talk about. Whether or not that can be transported here, I really don't know enough about it to say. Right. But I would say that we need some kind of plan so that we're all talking to each other and we're all aiming in the same direction. And those kinds of communication are not occurring systematically enough, it seems to me. And if we could foster that kind of dialogue across the sectors, and including employers as well, including industry, the needs of industry, including the federal government because of its needs for national security and everything else, I'd like to see it all put together so we all know what we're aiming at.
But then we can figure out how to guide students through that process.
So I couldn't agree more that we need to have more pathways. And I think what, Steve, between what you and Carol were saying, I think that this idea of engaging in systems thinking about these issues so that this is not institution thinking. Right. It's not even regional thinking. It's thinking about, all right, what are the major hurdles, nodes along the path?
But do you think we have a clear indication of what we want today's students to know and to possess coming out of high school, coming out of college, whatever?
Well, I think that the nation has made a pretty darn good down payment on
with Common Core.
With what as Mitch said, we used to call the Common Core, with higher standards. I think that that's good.
Right.
I think that there's been this very, very strong conversation between employers, brokered by foundations, some colleges and universities about, and fill in your brand, deeper learning, 21st century learning, the competitiveness agenda. I think that we're circling in on a set of non-discipline specific competencies that we believe that successful college students, whether it's 2-year or 4-year, ought to have mastered at an important level. I think we need to move that conversation forward. But I do think, and we're trying to foster that. The last White House College Success Summit focused on pre-K through college completion partnerships in regions. And so whether it was Chicago or Riverside County in California, the Rio Grande area, Chamber of Commerce area in Texas, and Florida has made, I think, this most significant investment in creating those seamless pipelines of any state. I think we're starting to figure it out, but we've got a lot to do. And before I turn it over to Carol, you made the comment in passing, and I want to come back to it. One of the things that is stressing this system and making it so hard for families is the state disinvestment in higher education over the last 10 years. States had to make very hard choices during the recession between the pools of discretionary money that they had. But I think that it was all of our hope that as states pulled out of the recession, that investments in higher education would increase. But instead, we're seeing decreases. Carol's mentioned the social compact. And I know that Governor Daniels worked so hard during his time as governor to build a strong, both logical and political connection between the needs of the state, the hopes of the state, and the higher education.
But have we kind of lost that argument of higher ed as a public good?
I think
No, I mean,
No,
I don't, because I think it's on us in higher ed to talk about it more, to talk about not in terms of what society gets from us, but what we owe society and how we measure our own delivering on that. And we haven't done a very good job of that. We just haven't taken that on as our responsibility, and I think it really is our responsibility. But can I just say one small, I mean, we talked at lunch today, we heard from some teachers who talked about the importance of making education relevant for students. And, you know, the bargain of higher ed, stay in school, do well in school, go to college, you'll get a better job, you'll have a better life, that like has to appear credible to our young people, or they're not gonna just take our word for it. And one of the things that I think I found out partly through conversations with the Department of Ed and others in Washington is that if you combine basic disciplinary knowledge with community-based learning and opportunities to work in the community, with an internship, with a kind of sense of financial wherewithal and financial literacy, students can do better. And that kind of education, that holistic education, which I think liberal arts institutions try to represent, requires a lot of collaboration across sectors that now don't normally collaborate. So now our students talk to potential employers as seniors. Or when they want an internship. We're trying to start that conversation when they enter as freshmen. What do you want your life to be like? You know, what gives you pleasure? What do you care about? What problems do you want to work on? So that we can be sure that they acquire the experiences as well as the classroom knowledge that they need to be good at that on the day after graduation. And the more we have those conversations, the more we understand about the ecosystem that's required to get students these competencies. And then I don't care how they get them. I don't care if they get them in class, or if they get them from having a job, or if they get them from community work, or I just want them to have them.
They don't seem to be necessarily getting them now from most colleges. I mean, one of the things that I've been visiting in the last couple of months are all these bridge programs for recent college graduates that are popping up all over the country to help them get jobs, because nearly 50%, according to the Federal Reserve, nearly 50% of bachelor's degree recipients are underemployed, meaning they're in jobs that don't require a bachelor's degree. And they're coming out and they're now paying somebody else to kind of give them the quote unquote real world skills that many of their institutions didn't give them.
Yeah, so I think that's on us to fix. And I mean, I have to say, I breathe rarefied air. So our students get jobs, and a lot of these, we're I breathe rarefied air in this. But I do think that it is on educations that have traditionally, and liberal arts, the liberal arts sector is a prime example of this, that have said, no, we're not about jobs, we're about education, to see that those two things can no longer be talked about separately, and to acknowledge that for our mission, which is leadership and service, educating students for lives of leadership and service, they have to get a job. And that if you see that as antithetical to what you do or somehow beneath you, then you are doing a huge disservice to the people you claim to serve. And I absolutely believe that. But I think most educators believe that.
We're going to be opening it up to the audience in about 5-6 minutes, but there's a few more questions I want to ask. So let's go back to this public-private good, Eduardo. Has higher ed lost this argument?
I don't think we have, but we need to look beyond that. Because I think the argument that we need to be using is that of the economic necessity, more than just public good and the social compact. We all sounds good and we all subscribe to it, but it's an issue of economics of the 21st century. And you talked about the German system. I have studied that. I've been to Germany. And I can tell you the American public will never subscribe to that, because we will not allow the system to determine early in the young people's life where they go to university or where they go to a vocational school. This is not rocket
Right, but on the other side, we do, as I've been talking to a lot of students about how they pick career, I mean, we do very little career exploration these days in K through 12 or even post-college. I mean, most students go to college not really having any idea about what they want to do. And even if they say they know what they want to do 2 or 3 years later, they're going to change their mind anyway. So on one hand, we don't want the German system, but on the other hand, we have too much flexibility.
But Jeff, the fact of the matter is that we know what works. It's not like we don't know what works. We have done enough research in this country. We have dealt with this issue long enough to know what works. And many of us have expressed different ways in which we can fix the system. It's a question of developing the attitude and developing the courage to be able to change the way we do things and how we do them, to be able to accommodate the needs of society today. We work with the high school. We work with 32 high schools, with every student in those schools from the 9th grade. We become partners. We have staff at the schools. We do all kind of programs, not just financial aid, but all kind of situations. We work with the parents. We do all kind of workshops for them. We give them career exploration and all those things. So when they come to college, they have a better idea of what they are getting into. And we had a tremendous draw, because we draw more than 50% of all the graduates in Miami-Dade County. But the fact of the matter is that we cannot ignore in this conversation what you mentioned. That is that this investment of the states in higher education is serious. Yep. And as we grow and bring more students, we either have two choices. One is we make the whole system mediocre, or we start eliminating the students that we don't want to work with because they will not meet our standards for completion and all the expectation that the federal government is now sort of setting up for us. So it's a real quandary.
But what to do, President Daniels, I'm going to pick on you since you were also a former governor. I was on Capitol Hill last week, and Senator Alexander mentioned when he was governor of Tennessee, Medicaid took up about 8% of the budget. Yeah. Today it takes up 31%. And he said most of those dollars have come from higher ed.
This is exactly the point I was going to butt in.
Right, so
I think this notion, I don't think the public good ethos is as gone as some people claim. There's a couple other parts moving here. They're macro. We've got a pathetically weak economy, and when you really look at it, it's the weakest recovery ever from a recession like this. So I don't know any state that's recovered to the extent you would have expected in terms of the basic revenues. Secondly, absolutely, it's a absolute parallel to what the federal government. A big problem for higher ed federally is the entitlement programs are eating the whole budget. Right. And so there's going to be less and less for Ted to use on good ideas that he has. It's exactly the case. Our state was a little more fortunate than most. Somebody added it up. I think Indiana is second or third in maintaining higher ed spending. Well, not going to pat ourselves too much on the back. If we had a smart policy, it was a Medicaid policy that kept that from exploding as it did in other places. then finally, higher ed needs to look a little bit at itself, because I know an awful lot of public decision makers who said, what'd you do with all the money we gave you all those years? Now we find out you built palaces with it, you built amenities with it, you didn't deliver us more graduates, and by the way, we notice you got a lot of that money stashed away in the different corners. So I think that has led to some weakening of the
So is there a trust, what you're saying is there's a trust issue?
Sure, a little bit, and not everywhere, not every institution, but I don't think I just think it's neither fair nor complete to just say, well, country's changed its mind, doesn't value the higher ed anymore.
Before we open it up to the audience for questions, I want to give Ted a question around solutions, right? So you've seen a lot of potential solutions, both in your time right before you entered government and now in the Department of Education. There's a lot of discussion around the power of technology. We saw the announcement last week with edX in Arizona State around a freshman global academy with MOOCs and a pathway to credit. We've talked a lot about competency-based education, this idea of measuring learning based on what you know rather than how much time you spend in a seat. So there's plenty of ideas out there. What do you see as some of the potential good ones, particularly the ones that could get over the quote-unquote regulatory hurdles that we always hear about, right? Well, the accreditors will never go for them, and the financial aid folks will never go for them in the department.
Just to pick two.
Just to pick two.
So first, to step back, and we've been sort of talking about a lot of the problems. One of the things that I actually think is a highlight, and yes, there's a trust problem, and there is a sense that some subset of institutions sort of don't get it and just kind of want to put the wall down and not attend to these conversations. But for the most part, I've been terrifically impressed by the level of innovation in higher education, and at the sincerity with which leaders like Mitch Daniels and the University Innovation Alliance, Steve, Eduardo, Carol, I mean, these guys are not up here at random, the way they've taken on these challenges and really helped their institutions see things in new ways and do things in new ways. So I think that's great. So I think that, period, new paragraph, I think that the multiple ways in which we and students can now access content and experiences is the heart of what's going to change higher education. And institutions that can learn fastest how to manage and shape that rather than control it and deny it are the institutions that are going to lead. Governor Daniels' program in starting a whole new school at Purdue that is bigger than a Skunk Works, but is the way that you're really trying to say, all right, we're going to build something brand new that's going to try to do that. That's the kind of thing that is scalable, and it's scalable both inside institutions and across institutions. And I think that there's just enormous, enormous promise there. Last paragraph. I also know, and I have said this to many of you in the room, that the problem with too much innovation in American higher education, two problems with it. One is it's not communicated or shared well. I think we just have to get better at that. And second is that these innovations at some point in their scaling up do come into contact with regulatory barriers. And it's our responsibility to be out in the field working with institutions and asking the question constantly, what do you need from us, or what don't you need from us that can help knock down some.
But at the same time, you're in the business of protecting taxpayer dollars and students. We just seen over the last couple of days, Corinthian College going out of business, and there was this movement, a couple of decades ago that allowed the growth of the for-profit higher education industry, mainly around innovation, right? They were serving students in new and different ways that weren't being served by traditional universities. So there's always this push and pull between allowing innovation and also protecting students and taxpayer dollars.
And I would say not a panacea, but one of the things in the new models of teaching and learning and assessment is that we can actually figure out a whole lot sooner than we could in traditional
when things are not going
the right way for students.
Okay, that's great. Okay, we are going to open it up to the audience for questions. We have a microphone that will be passed around. And please ask a question, not try to do too many comments. So go ahead. Yes.
Yes, good afternoon. stunned 45 minutes and not a conversation about costs.
Me too.
90, 90.
I had them on my list, I just never
Massive
got to them.
increase in average costs, median salaries have barely moved. It's coming up on May 1st when deposits are due. The real life conversation American families are having is, how much debt do I go to this school versus doing this? Do I go to a community college for 2 years and transfer? It's all about cost benefit. And to go 45 minutes without it even coming up, I was stunned.
Well, except I thought that's what we were talking about. I mean, the whole point about innovation is precisely
To reduce costs.
To reduce costs. So I'm surprised about this being stunned by that, because in fact I thought that was the premise of what we were talking about.
Yeah, and it's
So
a
we're talking about
driver,
affordability.
lack of completion.
Yeah.
I project.
That's right, you project and then I'll repeat the question.
And could you introduce yourselves as we go through?
Sure. Michael Schrade with MIT. I also read rarefied air. But I'm a little surprised by your characterization on disinvestment. Why not the more logical interpretation, say the reason why there is disinvestment is that people think it's not a good investment. It's a rational response. And I just want to pay a compliment to the Wall Street Journal piece on the governor's, the president and producer. So my question for all of you is, do you believe, given the initiatives that you're taking, that in your schools, that you deliver a better return on investment in the year 2015 than you did in 2010? And if you do believe that it's a better investment, quantify it for us. 10% better, 5% better? I think that's where accountability comes from.
But we can't measure it. Go
So
ahead.
I honestly think this is the value and specifically the return on investment is a conversation that is now beginning to take place in earnest. And I know this partly because I know the Boston Consulting Group, their social impact group, is now thinking about this and sort of trying to get their head around it. I would say that we haven't figured out how to quantify our social value. I think we do a pretty good job, I'm sure at MIT you could answer this question, right? I mean,
We're spoiled.
right, well, I am too, right? So I think we do a pretty good job of demonstrating to our own students and graduates the return on investment of what they invest in Davidson's education. Now, like MIT, we're need blind, we meet need, we do it without loans. There's a lot of, rarefied air there, right? But where I think we haven't done a very good job, and this speaks to the disinvestment by the state, is demonstrated the return to the society around us on investing in higher education. And the fact is that even with a little bit of, I'm not advocating this, but there is data that suggests that even a little bit of college increases earning potential, increases the tax base, and is actually good for the society around us. So I like the social impact bond mentality where you really do try to quantify the cost of doing something and then demonstrate to those around you that investing in higher education either saves you enormous amounts of money down the line or has a payoff that you can easily point to.
But of course, we've been talking about averages for so long, right? I mean, there's a big difference between the return on investment of getting a bachelor's degree from MIT and the one from a Corinthian college, right? I mean, not to pick on Corinthian today, but there's a huge difference. And so we just have treated all of higher education up until this point as one bucket.
Right, I see that.
I just say we're in the state of California, right? And the state of California's economy was built by a university system, which is the finest university system in the world. I would think it's fair to say, bar none, in terms of its contribution to research, to workforce development, to a whole host of social benefits.
And then it kind of lost its way.
Well, it hasn't lost its way in terms of its research productivity.
No, but it lost its way in terms of serving the
Well, if
serving the
you're
students.
looking
of
at
the state.
if you're looking
Right.
at the benefits to individual students,
Right.
that's one thing you have to measure. But if you're looking at the social benefits of investing in these institutions, which is astounding, it seems to me, and it's like investing in medical research. And again, we've seen the Milken Institute's very good at collecting these statistics on the multiplier effect of every dollar that's spent at the National Institutes of Health in terms of the industries that it generates, the jobs that it generates, the wealth that it creates for this nation, and ultimately the wealth that it creates for the world. So you have to measure multiple dimensions when you're looking at this. It's not just the benefit to the individual student, it's also what the students who go out there are then contributing because they're founding companies, they're doing a tremendous amount of work, they're contributing to the growth of the economy, and that is something that can be quantified.
Is your school a better investment now than it was 5 years ago?
We're certainly doing, if you're looking at it in terms of research, if you're looking at it in terms of the contributions that we're making as an institution, I would say undoubtedly yes.
Yes, question over here.
Elizabeth Lee with Voice of America. You touched on technology, you touched on access. I'm thinking about how can that perhaps become an equalizer to make higher education more affordable?
Carol, do you want to talk a little bit about your edX work?
So I think there's all kinds of answers to that question, and I can give you two that are different, very different and unexpected. So we have a partnership with a foundation, with our local school district, with edX, and with the College Board to develop blended learning curricula for advanced high school classes that we're testing now in our school districts, in our public school district. And if it's effective at improving scores on the AP test, we will disseminate that and give it away. So that's a totally technology-enabled innovation that is aimed at teachers and teacher professional development, designed to make classroom instruction better, that we can then blow into a MOOC. So that's one example of how technology can improve education. Another is in terms of the kind of intellectual and research communities that can be constituted through technology. So we are fortunate and lucky to be a partner with edX, and one of our courses was on HIV/AIDS. And the global community that was constituted through the students who enrolled in that course created a virtual archive of AIDS-related material that can then be curated by our students or anyone else that will serve the research community and creates a new research community that didn't exist before that course started. So, and in addition to giving access. So I think both the nature of research communities, the extent and reach even of small schools like Davidson, and our ability to have a broader impact on the educational ecosystem is dramatically enhanced by technology. And it is completely irresponsible to ignore that potential, in my opinion.
Other questions from the audience? Yes, over here. And then I'll come back here.
Hello, Elizabeth Bell, Associate Professor, Physics and Astronomy, West Los Angeles Community College. We have this question, especially in light of funding allocation and resources. You had briefly mentioned success, and I think everybody's trying to figure out exactly how are we defining success. Completion rates, transfer rates, graduation rates, what we're teaching them, what they're learning. How are you defining success from your point of view, and how do you think we should be defining success from within the community colleges?
That's a great question.
Well, let me tell you in the state of Florida how we define success. It's defined in terms of number of students who graduate, the ones that are still in school in good standing, and the ones who transfer. For example, at my institution, we have an 87% success rate. That's the definition. But there are different ways in which you can define success. And we all look at how does that benefit the student. It's the bottom line. How the students benefit, because students come to school for different purposes, especially at community colleges. Some of them just come to be able to pass a licensure exam. I apologize for my voice, I'm losing it. Some of them come to get a 2-year degree and then transfer. Some of them come for very technical 2-year program. By the way, the students who come to my college and get into the 2-year social and science program, the state statistics show that those students are making between $8,000 and $10,000 more beginning earnings than students with bachelor's degrees in Florida. Something to be said about, what's going on in the economy in terms of those programs. We also offer baccalaureates that are very workforce oriented. Our baccalaureates are about, not only have a higher placement rate of our students in the 90s, but they have beginning earnings compared to the regular baccalaureates of the system that are much higher than for the regular baccalaureates. So a question of success depends on how you evaluate it.
Because of the workforce aspects of your institution, you have great ROI numbers, Ted. But this goes back to this idea of completion. Is completion just good enough if there's not something at the other side? I mean, most students go to college now, and they'll tell UCLA researchers that they go to college to get a better job. Right? And if they're not getting a better job at the end of the day, if almost 50% of bachelor's degree recipients now are underemployed, are we really succeeding?
But those students are also talking about their values, and yes, there's been a change in the ranking of what students want. But they are cognizant of those other things, which is what makes it so complicated, right? It's very difficult to answer the question, have students achieved a set of learning outcomes? for reasons that we've talked about before. And so I think we're kind of limited at the moment to proxies. And I think community colleges, because of the at least tripartite nature of their mission, have some interesting proxies. So a proxy for learning outcomes for a student who wants to transfer is, did they show the skills, the record, and the achievement to be able to be accepted at a four-year institution? That's an interesting proxy. Similarly, in employment, do they have a job? Is it a job that allows them to pay their loans if they have them, to kind of get on with life? That's another proxy. Did they come for a license, and did they get it? So there are some pretty interesting, I think, proxies that in kind of the pragmatic real world we can rely on.
We have 1 minute left, and now we have a man in the back who has a microphone, and we have the two people in the front who have been waiting. Let's go 1 minute, and we're going to be very quick. In question?
Mike Downer, Senior Vice President, Capital Research and Management Company. We manage the largest college savings plan in the country. You talked about the value of college education. However, does it alarm you at all that the administration thought it was a good idea to repeal college savings legislation, which permits middle class and other families to save for college? Does that send alarm bells to all of you, or what was your reaction to that?
Just give them a mulligan and forget about it.
Right? Yes, up here, two questions. Yes, and then we have to wrap up.
Chris Hartz, I consult to DOD and DARPA, and my doctorate is in educational technology. I went looking for courses for cyber warriors around the country, and I found both a university and a city college in Shreveport, Louisiana, that was doing really well with both. They were doing three interesting things.
The session's really over, so let's if you could just get to the question.
They had a 2-year boot camp. They allowed industry on campus for the students to come talk to, and they demanded an internship in the last semester. Have you guys tried that, and how did it work?
Well, I think a lot of the discussion we've had today is the mixture between classroom learning and outside the classroom learning.
Yes, absolutely.
That's a great model.
Okay, we are at the end of the session. Please join me in thanking this great panel. Thank you.